The American state of Ohio is a land filled with haunted places, urban legends, and paranormal phenomena. The local residents living in Ohio have heard and sometimes even lived through these scary supernatural stories. And for today's episode, I have a compilation of 5 real scary stories from the state of Ohio. And now I'll begin reading the stories. And meanwhile, I'd request you to subscribe to Mr. Scare for daily horror stories. Also tell me which state or city would you want me to cover next. There are far too many creepy things and urban legends from Ohio. I have had a first-hand experience of a place that is so haunted that our group had to get the hell out of there as quickly as possible. It was around the Blue Rock State Park in southern Ohio. The place is essentially in the middle of the woods, near some trails that my friends and I would ride our four-wheelers on, back in the early 2000s. The best way to get there is from the park itself. It's an unassuming location until you learn the reason why it has got the reputation. So the history of this place goes that in the 70s and 80s, this particular area was a popular spot for hunting and for young people to party and drive their trucks in the mud and through the trails in the woods. My dad and his group of friends were always there creating memories. There were already some superstitious stories about the ghosts of the Native Americans who lived in the area and had cursed the land. My dad's friend was out on a hunting trip on his own. He had a nice time until he started feeling dizzy and then blacked out near his tent. Now my dad's friend swears up and down that he had blacked out and then woken up to a medicine man riding away from him on a horse. He also claimed the gun he was carrying was unable to fire after the incident. That friend was over at our house the other day, and he narrated the entire story from whatever he could recollect. Apparently, the main trigger event that caused the woods to become as haunted as it is right now was when a young lady was in the back of a pickup truck with her young child. The truck turned over and the child was killed on impact. He told that the legend states that the mother in her grief either died from drugs or alcohol or maybe suicide. Sometime after the incident, creepy things started happening in the woods. Usually around 1 in the morning and lasting late into the night. The landowner and other local residents reported hearing the cries of a child followed by the blood-curdling screams of a young woman. My friends and I would ride our four-wheelers in the woods during the day with no problem, but upon hearing the stories, our curiosity got the better of us. We went camping in the woods one night and sure as hell, at around 1:30 we began to hear the cry, and then the scream followed. We stayed there for a bit to make sure that we were not being pranked by someone. The screams were making our hearts sink. We could literally sense the dread slowly and gradually creeping in. It was already pretty chilly the night we went, so we did not sense any extra dip. The forest was still. No movement. Just the crying. Frantic crying that we tried to listen closely so as to find the direction it was coming in from. A minute or two later, we all realized it at the same time. It had slowly crept closer. The entity was coming closer to us. 2 of us had already rushed and started the car while the other 3 froze in fear. I was among the ones frozen as we heard a few twigs snap in one corner. They pressed the horn and woke us from our fear. We left all our stuff right where it was and got the hell out of there. While we were driving out, I looked behind me. And in the red glow of my tail lights, I saw the image of a desperate woman running after me with her arms stretching out, reaching for something that she had lost long ago. As I said, it's pretty far off the beaten path, but my story is true and the place really does exist in Ohio. So if you ever find yourself in southern Ohio, around 1 a.m. and you want to get spooked, it's definitely worth the hike. I live in Northwest Ohio, and this is a fairly common story in this area. There is this 4-mile house road. The legend goes something like that around World War II, there was an Army mail carrier guy. And he had come home early from war. He was on his mail delivery bike that they used in the U.S. Army. So he got home early from the war, and he went to surprise his wife. But then he ended up walking in on her with another man. So in a furious outrage, he sped off on his bike. His house was on a 4-mile road that ran under a short bridge. On his way back to town to get a drink after he walked in on his wife, he forgot that the bridge was too short and close to the underpass road. And unfortunately, he decapitated himself on it. Now people say that if you do something with turning your headlights on and off 5 times, and then take the keys out of the ignition and put them on the hood, while being on the road, a headless motorcycle man will pretty much race you. But it is claimed that he drives directly behind you, and if he passes through the car, the youngest person in the car will be the first to die out of the group. So I was at a friend's place where his elder brother told us about this, and we were eager to go test it out. We were teens back then, and we got rushed from such stupid adventurous things. We had explored a nearby so-called haunted neighborhood to find nothing there at all. Maybe that gave our confidence a big boost. His brother drove us there as we still did not have our licenses. Upon reaching there in the middle of the night, we were spooked just by the ambience in the vicinity. The road was isolated because the locals avoided using that route at night. We get there, park the car, and look at one another. I could sense that no one wanted to go ahead with it. But our collective overconfidence overcame logic, and we nodded. We did as the urban legend required us to do. And we waited. Nothing. There was absolute silence around us. Dead silence. Now that was creepy because up until that point, we could at least hear some bugs and other nocturnal sounds. Out of nowhere, we are alarmed by a whirring sound from the back. We turn around, and to our shock and awe, we see a person coming towards us on a bike. We freeze in panic and keep watching the person slowly creeping toward us. It took us a while to digest the fact that he was the spirit of the army man. Because he looked real, and somewhere we thought this was just a mere coincidence, and he was a real person who was coming in our direction. We sat there in dead silence, with our jaws dropped. Now I don't know who it was, but one of us just screamed,
"Start the engine! Now!"
And within a split second, we got back to our senses and panicked at the situation. The biker was closer than ever. It was almost as if he had hypnotized us all this while as he slowly crept in closer. Our car started speeding, but he was just near our tail. His neck had a thick scar on it, and his eyes were wrathful. Now I was worried the most because I was the youngest in the group. And the lore suggested that if he drove past us, I would be the first one that he kills. Just when we thought he would be reaching us in a moment, the car's engine made a loud noise, as if there was some minor explosion. We looked ahead, but there was no smoke coming from the bonnet, so we did not bother. I shouted to drive faster, and that's when my friend announced,
"He's gone!"
We turned back, and to our surprise, he was gone. Vanished into thin air. We didn't stop the car until we got home. Slept all together, just in case. The next day we woke up as early as possible, and apparently, all of us had had the same dream. A dream where we relived the army mailman's last moments. I remember seeing him enter the room where he caught his wife cheating. Then the alcohol drinking, followed by the subsequent accident. Now that also explains how people got to know about this very personal story that he would have not shared with anyone. I hope he finds peace. Ohio University is haunted for sure. I mean, being a local in Ohio, I had obviously heard hundreds of stories about how the university, just like many other places in Ohio, is haunted. In my life, despite living in the infamous state, I have had only one paranormal experience in my life. And that too was at Ohio University. My daughter too goes there and has had several experiences. I remember her telling me that in her dorm room, she kept hearing breathing sounds whenever she was trying to go to sleep. She asked her roommate why she was breathing like that, to which the roommate said that she thought it was my daughter that made the noise. There were times when she kept hearing metallic clanks in the room. They stayed up for hours, trying to figure out the source of the noise, but to no avail. The worst one was when she was sitting on her bed in the darkened room at 3 a.m. with her laptop on her lap. She closed the laptop, lay on her side, and felt a hand grab her hip. My daughter claims that she could clearly feel each individual finger. And she was alone in her room that night. She called home that night and told me everything. She sounded paranoid, and hence I suggested her to change her dorm room for her own good. So she later moved to an apartment, and despite that, creepy things continued to happen. Apparently, the most common thing in that university is hearing breathing right next to you. I heard it myself when I went into their bathroom. The other roommates always try to have music or the TV on to suppress that chilling noise. My daughter had also heard knocking on her closed bedroom door when no one else was in the apartment. I actually worked at the Ridges for 3 years while I was at OU and never experienced anything strange there, but I did work in one of the rehab sections, which used to be a dentist's office. One of our cabinets was left over from when it was active, and there were still handwritten labels for all the dental supplies, which was kind of creepy. I can assure you all that probably anyone who went to Ohio University has had a personal ghost story. A friend of mine lived in the convo, which he swore was very haunted. There used to be lots of banging on the closet doors. And there are a lot of urban legends about suicides and bricked-up dorm rooms too. A few of those are assumed to be just stories. I did have a very strange experience in a home on Mill Street. It was rumored to be haunted, but I lived there for 2 years and never had any experiences. This was until one winter break when I was there by myself. It was Christmas Eve and I had packed my up car to go home for the holiday and was waiting for it to warm up in the parking lot. I returned to my room and was grabbing a few final things. I had closed my bedroom door to keep the heat from my space heater in the room when I heard 2 loud pounds on my door. And maybe loud would be an understatement, because they sounded as if they were almost breaking the door in half. Summoning some courage, I opened it to an empty hallway. The doors of the house were locked and there was no one in there. I flipped off my space heater, walked out of the house, and drove straight home to Cincinnati. So yeah, Ohio is pretty much haunted. You must have heard about Mirror Lake too. So based on what I have heard growing up in Ohio, there used to be an elderly couple that was a part of the faculty and lived on the campus. That place is now referred to as the Scholars Hall. The husband and wife had lived there for a couple of decades, as they taught students at the same university. They were beloved amongst all the students from the university. Every winter, the couple goes by Mirror Lake to stay there. The husband would share hot cholocate with anyone who came by, while his wife would go ice skating on the frozen lake. Students would join the two for free hot chocolate or ice skating whenever it was cold enough. As both began to age, their careers were beginning to come to an end. The wife decided to retire earlier than planned, so she could spend more time with students outside of the classroom. The husband was planning on doing the same and retiring early, until the campus administration informed the couple that they would not be allowed to continue living on campus if neither of the two was teaching. Since he still loved teaching, the husband decided to stay employed at the university, while his wife retired from teaching. That's how the two were able to continue living happily near students. As the years progressed, the administration in the husband's department began to give him more and more work, hoping that too much work would persuade him to retire, and so they could hire new faculty in his position to replace him. The older man stayed resilient and kept up with his responsibilities, even though it meant that he was able to spend less time watching his wife spend time with the students. It was said that he would often watch her from a window in their home as she continued her ice skating tradition with students. Sure enough, the older man's department kept pushing him to retire and throwing more work at him. Eventually, it became a little too much for him to endure, and the older man was hospitalized as he was spending too much time on his work and not taking care of himself. He died shortly after, and that left his wife devastated. The university approached the wife about having her move somewhere new to live, so that she could move on and away from the memories. But instead of moving, the devastated widow hung herself from a tree branch in the thicket between Mirror Lake and the Thompson Library. The legend goes that on cold winter nights, when the lake is frozen and there are very few people around, you can see figure ice skating on Mirror Lake amongst the swirling winds. If you see this figure, you can also see the ghost of her husband sitting on a nearby bench, watching as she enjoys her winter tradition. Legend also claims that if a specific light is left switched on in the scholar's house at night, I think from the same room where the husband would watch his wife from. Then you can see the silhouette of his wife hanging in the trees, between Mirror Lake and the Thompson Library. They are said to be harmless, and I too haven't ever heard any friend of mine from that university complain or narrate an incident involving the spirits of two teachers. But at the same time, I have heard stories where some curious students tried to explore the legend and went near the lake just to be scared to their guts. These aren't just urban legends based on rumors. These are real stories about real people, and there are emotions attached to them. I sure remember one story that my granny told me about Baker West's housekeeper. There was once a housekeeper who worked on the first floor of Baker Hall West. She was supposedly a shy and sweet older lady who was a bit slow in her work. But she enjoyed her position in the house that she worked in. From time to time, she would be teased by residents living in her floor's section, but for the most part, she was well respected. One year, she had a hallway of entirely male students who were particularly rash and rowdy. The group would prank her constantly and leave the facilities in terrible condition. She would never complain about it, although she resented their way of living. Eventually, it got to a point where it started stressing her out. One day, she decided to put her foot down and told the boys that if they didn't stop with their immature and disgusting pranks and the constant disrespect, she would stop cleaning their spaces. The boys didn't say much, and the housekeeper thought they would improve. But her stern warning had not gone down well with the students, and instead of behaving themselves next time onwards, they rather decided to play another prank on her. On an afternoon before her shift ended, as the housekeeper was getting ready to leave for the weekend, the boys surprised her in a basement hallway. They tied her up and left her in a former custodial closet for the entire weekend. Unfortunately, that room has several leaks and floods. They left her on the floor covering the drain, and the room flooded over the weekend, drowning her. She was found dead the following morning. It was too late until she was found. The boys were held responsible for their disgusting act, and the university drilled a sizable hole in the floor of the room to ensure that it wouldn't flood again. A day or two later, things seemed to move on as if nothing ever happened. Shortly thereafter, there were sightings of a shadowy figure all throughout the Bakers. And if that's not creepy enough, only men have reported seeing it. The story goes that the shadowy figure is the spirit of the housekeeper, and legend claims that she will haunt men living in either Baker East or West. And I would vouch for this claim, because when my cousin arrived for the summer, he was acting a little uncomfortable or disturbed. I was a little too young to notice the change in his behavior. But my mom asked him about it over dinner. She assumed that he probably missed his home or parents. But what he said gave us chills. There was a dead silence at the dinner table when he said that he was seeing a lady in unusual places. Mind you, he was never been told about the urban legend of the baker's housemaid. And he himself described the lady as looking like an elderly housemaid from the past. Out of curiosity, my mom asked what she said, to which he said nothing. The ghost just kept staring at him endlessly from a distance. And he just wanted to leave the place at the earliest. And by the way, that's precisely what the housekeeper's spirit ever wanted. So yeah, Ohio is pretty haunted. But women feel safe here in Bakers because of the undead housekeeper. Thank you so much for listening to these stories. If you enjoyed these scary stories, then leave a like and comment your thoughts on the same. I'll suggest you to watch the entire series of my trucker stories. I have made over 7 or 8 episodes, and I'm confident that you would enjoy those. Also, now that you are a part of our horror community, I'd like to tell you that we are super close to 2,000 subscribers, and it would be a delight if you too could help me in reaching that milestone. Apart from Ohio, what other American state would you want me to make videos on for the next horror podcasts? And while you're at it, comment and tell me your favorite horror story topics such as trucker stories, Wendigo or Skinwalker or any other cryptid stories, or whatever else that comes to our minds. I'll see you tomorrow.